Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Practice of Love podcast. This is your host, co-host, Lair Torrent. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here, as always, with my lovely bride, partner in life, my better half, Ashley Torrent. She is a psychospiritual counselor, and she is also a medium. At jump, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's do a little trigger warning for folks, because this is a big one.
Yeah.
This topic's tough. And it could be one that does trigger people. We've often say that's a overly used word, but it's an apt one, certainly in this particular case. So today we are going to be talking about repressed childhood sexual trauma and how it can present itself in your relationship and how to deal with it. And how does the practice of love hold space for this type of revelation and if it comes up for you. So tread lightly, my friends. This one's not going to be easy for us. And perhaps not easy for you. Maybe harder for me than anybody. Well, didn't expect that. But I guess if you're doing a podcast and you're not touching into issues that push some buttons in you and feel hard and feel tough, then perhaps you're not doing it right. So here we go. Yeah. Where would you like to start?
Well, we had a conversation about whether to talk about this in our podcast. And we really felt, since this is something happening in our relationship, that it would be important to talk about. So, and I also thought that sexual abuse, there's so much shame for the victim of sexual abuse. And, I think it's something like 1 in 3 women have been raped. This is more common than we realize. So one of my intentions in talking about this today for me is to help me not get closed up in shame, to help me liberate myself in talking about it, because I don't want to, although I do carry some shame around this topic about what happened to me, I don't want to stay there. So I feel like talking about it with you in this space and how we're working through it is important. And I know we're not the only ones dealing with this. As we know, we're therapists. Yeah. And one of the reasons we also felt like we could talk about it is because we've both been doing our own work for a while and working and been in this relationship for a long time, for over 20 years, that this is a conversation we could have and share that might be enlightening and supportive. So, one of the things that, where I thought we would start is sexual abuse is tricky. I think it's trickier than other types of abuse because, especially as a child, because memories of it can go down and get buried so deep that the person it happened to aren't even aware of it. And that's what happened to me. The first time I was aware that something happened to me I was probably 24 or 25. I was hanging out with my boyfriend. We were sitting on a bed. It was a boyfriend before you. And we were just talking, playing around. And as he was talking and laughing with me, he touched me in not even a sexual way, a playful way, but I didn't know his hand was going towards my body. I wasn't aware of it. And I jumped across the room. And I remember looking at him, and we both looked at each other and we were both like, what was that? Like, what just happened? Because it was so benign. I'd been with this person for over a year. We'd lived together. There had been never that exchange, but something about his touch and my lack of awareness that he was going to touch me just triggered a recoiling feeling. And we didn't talk about it much further. I didn't have a trigger. But then a few years later, I found myself thinking about that moment and just thinking about different reactions I'd had around men. And I started, I found some books. They're very popular sexual abuse books. I think it's called The Courage to Heal. Mm-hmm. And they have workbooks that you can do. You can read the workbook and do a checklist. And I remember going through the checklist and everything was like, yes, 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 yes. But the problem also is I've been physically abused. I've been emotionally abused. So many abuse markers are similar. So there was a part of me that was like, well, maybe I just check all these things are checked off because of the abuse I'm already aware of. So I just kind of put it in the back of my mind because I didn't have any evidence of it, right?
and can I ask a question at this point? And
Yeah.
is there some part of you, or have you heard of some part of your clients when they talk about it, like this thing is beginning to crest the possibility of being a memory, or I don't have a memory, but I have these markers. But there's some part of me that would love to be able to deny that that it's actually a thing.
Yeah, I think you don't ever want to admit that it's a thing.
Hmm.
I think, as much as I was curious, like what happened to me, right? What happened? Why am I this way? Why did I have this reaction? Why do I have this certain reaction to men? I
Hmm.
began to think that some of my reactions were just normal being a woman, the
Sure.
precautions around men down, streets of New York, not walking alone and things like that. But I I think what we find is like we don't want to admit it's a thing, but yet we're also looking for something to explain why we're reacting the way we're reacting,
Right.
right?
And,
So I do find
let
with
me.
my clients, often they doubt themselves because they don't actually have memories. And I, for the longest time, was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, this just can't be possible because I don't really have a memory of it. It doesn't make sense. I
Right.
needed it to make sense.
Sure. Of course, if you're going to say that something on this level has happened to you, experience this level of trauma, you want to be able to point to some evidence and say, there it is, that's who it was, that's when it happened, and that's the place that it happened. Let me also say at the outset of this conversation, we're going to be talking about both facets here. Um, the facet of this presenting itself within a relationship. So certainly, and of course, the we're going to be talking about your experience, but we're also going to be talking about your partner's experience in this. And I can say from that aspect of, do we want to make this thing true? I didn't want this thing to be true. And I
Right.
saw you kind of poking around. And if I'm really honest, I wanted to validate your experience and hold space for it and have conversations. And, um, you know, if it's true, it's true. But man, I was really hoping and holding space for the possibility that maybe we were mistaken. Maybe it wasn't there.
Well, that just makes so much sense. I mean, you'd walked with me
Mm-hmm.
through so many dark times of healing, just the things that had happened to me alone, it's like, okay, isn't that enough? And then the
Right.
idea that there's some repressed other abuse that's living inside me and sexual,
Mm-hmm.
then my God. And I was so vulnerable, especially in the early years of our relationship. I can imagine going, when she uncovers this, what's going to happen to her? How much
Mm-hmm.
more can a person take? You know?
Exactly. Those are my exact thoughts. How much more
Yeah.
can this kid take? Yeah.
Right. And I
Yeah.
feel like you'd even said that, like, how much more can a person take? So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so back when I was looking at the books and trying to poke around, I put it on a shelf for a while. And, you know, when we'd been together, I didn't have sexual triggers with you. If anything, sex was incredibly grounding. I've
Mm-hmm.
talked about it openly that when I'd orgasm, I would cry, my heart would open, my body just felt so safe with you. But there were times where you would see, I think one of my favorite memories, even before we got together, is I was managing the bar we worked in, and a man came up behind me and put his hands on me. And it seems to be touch that's not expected is a huge trigger for
Mm-hmm.
me. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I don't know something's coming and it feels sexual in any manner, that is a huge trigger. So this man came up behind me and started rubbing my shoulders. And you remember watching me and you said, I froze. And I remember freezing and
You
not even
froze.
being able to, what?
You froze. I
Right.
didn't
I,
freeze.
I froze. You were watching me and you said, I froze.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember you describing what you saw in my face and thinking when this guy touched me, I didn't have a no. I couldn't even say, don't touch me. I mean, I'm pretty sure I just checked out. And you actually came over and told him to get his hands off me, or told
Yeah.
me that I could ask him to get his hands off me,
His
that I
fucking
could
hands.
put words to what I needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that making sense?
Yeah. No, I mean, and it makes no look. It's the freeze, right? It's that freeze response. You are the prey. There is a predator, and so this is your amygdala kicking on and doing what it
Mhm.
does. Lay flat. Hopefully, it'll just go away. Okay.
Right. And I want y'all to know this. I'm talking about this. I'm trying to be really mindful of how present I am and trying to stay really present and not dissociate. I feel very comfortable talking about it, but I am trying to be mindful of my own nervous system as we talk about it.
Right.
Um, but so what we're talking about is, I think for a lot of our relationship there, we were walking with a ghost.
Yes.
That's what it feels like to me. We were walking with a ghost, an unnamed ghost in the room. We would sometimes have conversations about it. We would talk about what if, we don't know. I didn't have any answers, didn't really come up in our sex life. Most of it was just my reaction around men. Um, I do think there were times that you and I would be playing around and we would get physical and kind of wrestling and stuff like that. And there would be a moment where, like, maybe it turned sexual, and I would have a moment where I would start to panic.
Hmm.
And that just felt so weird to me because I feel so safe with you. But I also assumed it was my body's response to physical abuse. Now things are getting a little rougher in a sense, and this feels dangerous. So I always just chalked it up to what had happened to me in that sense. But you've mentioned that you've had experience with clients that their partners have done this, right? Where they've
What's
been
that?
playing around.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Playing around and or having sex, and the trigger response comes in, and suddenly this person is, in a fetal position crying, and the partner's left thinking, well, what did I do? Something? What did I do? What's happening here? And so, the note I just kind of jotted down to make sure we covered it is, you said we had been having conversations about it over the years. And I have to say, in my experience, those conversations in retrospect were so important, um, because when that trigger response actually happened, I was more prepared for it.
Mm.
And I think, speaking to the shame of this thing for folks in your position who it's had, who this has happened to, we don't want to talk about it. I'm sure you don't want to say this was a thing. Maybe we don't want to feel like we've been victimized by it. We got past it. We buried it. We pushed it out. But if you're not talking with your partner about it and it comes to the surface, man, it's a shock to everybody. So anyway, long story long, I think the conversations that we had helped prepare my nervous system for this eventuality, the fact that this finally did land, smack dab right in the middle of our relationship.
Yeah. And I think another part of the problem is it, because it's a repressed memory, the body, the body never lies. So the body's
Mhm.
expressing something it's uncomfortable with, but the mind can't put that piece of the puzzle together. So we're such an evidence-based culture. Well, show me proof, show me evidence. You can't just
Right.
believe this happened to you. You have to
Right.
show me this happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
And to not have a memory or an understanding just feels like I'm lying. It feels like
Mm-hmm.
I'm making something up.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like I'm being dramatic or oversensitive. So I end up gaslighting myself. I end up
Well, I was to
doubting
say, how
myself.
hard is that? How hard is that to gaslight yourself? I mean, what does that feel like?
It's awful. It's awful because I want to trust my body. I spent so many years not being in my body. I want to trust my body. I want to trust its responses. And it telling me something's not safe, I have to honor that. But also, when I don't have evidence or understanding of what's not safe, it just makes me feel crazy.
Well, then when you get those markers and those feelings of something not being safe, and it's happening in a space that has been historically ultra safe, i.e., me and our relationship. What's
Mhm.
that like? Is that? I mean, it's got to be
That's
fucked up
even
and
more,
confusing. Yeah. Hmm.
that's so much more confusing. And I think one thing that was always helpful is if I ever said, oh, I'm feeling triggered or I'm not understanding, you have been really good about talking me through it and never second guessing me. You've always said, if something's there, trust that it'll come up when it's ready.
Hmm.
So I would say 2 or 3 months ago, I sat with my therapist, one of them. Again, I have two, which I'm so grateful for. I sat with one of my therapists who's been my therapist for, gosh, over 18 years. And we've been talking about this for years, the possibility of it. And I just could never come up with any information. And I sat down with her one day and I just said, I'm ready to heal whatever it is around men that I'm ready to heal, expecting it would be whatever is left unhealed about my relationship to my dad, and being
Right.
emotionally abandoned or anything like that. And I was like, I'm ready. And I remember as soon as I said that out loud, my body just contracted. And
It
then
said, really?
it totally said, really? You ready for this?
Okay, let's go with that, Ash.
And what was interesting is I never brought it up in therapy after that, after those weeks. I also noticed that I wasn't feeling a lot. I felt really, I'm someone, that me, I touch into my heart on a daily basis. I love when my heart opens. I love feeling my feelings. I'm all into it. For a couple months after that session, there was nothing. It was quiet. And I was like, okay, so maybe this is just a respite between whatever healing processes I'm going through. Maybe I'm just integrating, or maybe I'm all good for a while.
Yeah.
Well, and then a month ago, you and I were making out, getting ready to have sex. And I remember saying to you, I don't really feel here. And I said, but that's okay because sex is grounding. And I named it so you would know where I was. And I said, sex is
Mhm.
always grounding to me. And so we continued and we were kissing. Um, and then at one point you asked me,
Mhm.
like, what did you ask me?
I just stopped and I looked at you and I said, "Are you here with me?" And you
Right,
said, "I'm not, but I will be."
right. I thought I would be. And
Mhm.
so what I remember happening is all of a sudden, not only did sex hurt, as if my body had gotten really small. And I'm sharing this because I think when we talk about parts work is so important, how when
Yes.
we switch to another part of the brain, we can feel like a younger person or a different part of ourselves. I
Mhm.
felt like my screen and my mind split. There was one part of me having sex with my husband, who I knew was safe and I loved, and another part of me was panicking. And
Mhm.
sex actually hurt, and I felt like a little girl.
Mhm.
And I remember going and trying to talk myself out of it. Like, okay, this isn't happening. Let's just keep going. We're going to be okay.
Mhm.
But then you notice something was wrong.
Yeah.
And I was like, something is wrong. And I started to cry. And you
Mhm.
started to kiss me tenderly. And that was a huge trigger. Like, the
Yes.
more gentle you were, the more upset I got. And it just brought back all these memories of being raped as a little girl and somebody trying to tell me it's going to be okay when it's not.
Ugh. It makes my stomach fucking turn. God damn it.
Yeah. And I,
I'm
I
so
know these
sorry.
are details that may seem too intimate for some, but I also think they're really important because I know this has happened to other women. And I
Of
know
course
they
it
doubt
has.
themselves. And I know they just want to keep going and pushing through having sex.
Mhm.
But I would love that I was with you. And you actually were so supportive in kind of helping me through that because I was split in
Yeah.
that moment. I wanted to just ignore it. I didn't want to believe it. And then some part of me was just also like, here it is. Here it
Mhm.
is. You can't walk away from this. You can't leave this. You can't leave this little girl who's trying to show you something. You can't leave your body,
Mhm.
you know? And I remember we just stopped and you held me. And I'm pretty sure I just sobbed and
You did.
sobbed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've worked with couples with women that this has happened to in their relationships, men that they've been there for this, and the reactions can vary. Hopefully, you get some version of what we experienced and in our experience. Not everybody is a clinically trained psychotherapist that recognizes the trauma response when they see it.
Right.
Um, and so sometimes, you kind of, the men have, anecdotally, I've heard this in my practice, but I'm sure it's true at large too, that sometimes they can take it personally. They can kind of be like, what the fuck? What's going on here? I mean, I hope that's not, I'm sure that I know that's what happens from time to time. Um, and so for the people who are sort of witnessing this experience, it's so important to push pause, take that mindful breath, try to recognize, even if you're unsure as to what's going on, that something really important is happening. And as best you can, do not make this about yourself, and hold space as best you can for this person, even if you don't understand what's happening, right? Because obviously something is happening. This person is not devolving down and into tears during this experience of sexuality for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important because if you don't, it can be shaming and re-traumatizing in all the ways one can imagine if you're not particularly careful and particularly loving. And what your point was well made. It was like I was trying to be even more compassionate and tender with my touch and all of that, and it was going decidedly in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
this is so tricky because you could have easily felt like a predator,
Yes.
with my reaction. You could have easily felt shame.
Well, I had to fight it a little bit. Like I was like, okay, I just, because I'm a human being, and I felt that come up in me. Like, wait, what am
Why
I doing
wouldn't
so
you?
wrong? What's that?
I
Yeah.
said, why wouldn't you?
And so I used that mindful pause to stop and go, okay, wait, hold on. This is not about you. we can talk about whatever that is later. Um, Triaging the moment, and what's really important here is just being present for her. And so that's the place I came from.
And it was really incredible the space you held for me. And as much as I was heartbroken that it happened in that space with you, there was something so validating that you witnessed it, because then it made
Mm-hmm.
me feel less crazy, and that we'd been talking about this for years. Now, whether we'd been talking about it enough for years, like, you would have believed me either way. But for you to be a witness to that, and then so because afterwards I was like, okay, did that really happen? Was that really true? Like, I felt crazy. I felt, did I just dream that up? Like, what was going on? And you were like, no, Ash. And you walked me through what you saw and what you witnessed. And it was so helpful to me to hold on to that experience. Because there was a huge part of it that I had the feeling, I had the memory, but I couldn't look up in the memory to see who it was. So I still don't have that memory of who it was. I can see a body, I have a sense, but I don't have a memory of who that person was. And that makes you feel also like, okay, you don't remember who, but I could feel that that was all my body could handle, was
Mm-hmm.
just the memory of it. And I can see the room, I can see the age, I can see certain circumstances around it. Um, and you were just so quiet and still. You didn't go into shame, which I was really grateful for. And you held the ground for me. You kept me tethered to my own reality, which was huge. And after that, we talked about it a little bit. The thing that I really struggled with later that day and the next day was, how do I go back to the sex life we were having after
Mm-hmm.
this happened? I was really scared. I was scared, like, well, what if he kisses me and I react? What if he kisses me and I get triggered? What if in the middle of sex, this happens again? And I remember saying this to you, I'm scared, I'm scared. And one part of me was also saying, but I don't want to wait like forever and not try
Mm-hmm.
again, because I was afraid
Right.
if the longer we waited, the farther apart we would get. This would become bigger than us. And I remember you saying, it's okay. So if it comes up again, it's okay. We'll walk ourselves through it. I'll walk you through it. I got you. And that was huge for me, because I was like, okay, so I don't have to be ashamed of this happening again. I don't have to pretend it's not happening. I can't control it, but we're in this together. We'll be in this space together. And that just gave me freedom. And then I
Mm-hmm.
gave myself permission to also only go as far as I wanted to go.
That's right.
So we did try again. I think I
Mm-hmm.
even tried the next day because I wanted to take my power back. We tried the next day, and I could only go so far, but it was so liberating to say, that's all I can do. And you go, great.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and these things are, I'm not willing to do these things. This is kind of, these are some boundaries. That was all important information for me. Um, I do want to say that we are by no means saying that this is a prescription for how you should move through this if this is something that's happened or happening for you.
No.
Jumping back in the saddle the next day, that was very much your decision. And you also recognized that you had a partner that was on board and, kind of on belay, so to speak, holding the safety ropes, saying, you don't have to worry about me making this about me or me getting mad at you or you having to feel more shame. That we're both going to kind of go in there together, knowing what the possibilities are, putting some guardrails up. That was right for us, and I think everyone has to kind of decide for themselves what's right and what's not.
And really honoring your body. I mean, that day we tried again, I could feel myself dissociating again, and that's when I was like, stop. But I needed to go back in to reclaim something for myself. And I
Mm-hmm.
needed to also to know that it was okay that I say stop, and that was okay. Like, I needed to
Right.
really, although you said it and although I trust you, I needed to exercise that for myself, so I could know, like, okay, so this is the space I can go back to, and we can do it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And go ahead.
No, please.
I was just saying, so that was literally a month ago,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I just kind of want to share, for anybody that's gone through this or going through this, what Lair said, this is not a prescription. This is just an example of what happened and what's possible, and everybody moves at their own pace. My moving back into our sexual relationship, has been slow in some moments, and then some moments it's okay. Some moments I feel really blue about this and sad, and then some moments I don't even feel it at all. I think everyone handles this differently, and I know what I can't live with it at the forefront of my awareness every day of every moment, and I'm grateful that I've come to a place in my own healing where I can put it in a place that I'm working on actively, but I'm not drowning in it.
Mhm.
Um, but one of the biggest things for me that I've noticed is I've become to connect all these dots and my own behavior and in my own relationships and in my own responses. I mean, I can't tell you how many times because of this, the things that I thought were maybe the result of my relationship with my mother or being abused in other ways, I thought that was enough to explain some whatever I would call weird behavior or whatever,
Mhm.
which is not an appropriate term. But this has connected so many dots of my resistance to my own body, the shame I carry about my own body, the way I hold my sexuality, the way I dress, um, the way I respond to men. I mean, it's like this huge download of ahas. Like,
Mhm.
oh, and this, I think I've been saying to you, oh, and I understand this, and I understand
Mhm.
this, and I understand this now. And that is
This makes
liberating.
more
That
sense.
is freeing. What?
This makes more sense now.
So much makes more sense. And I feel free in a sense. I feel free because I can go, oh, I can point to this happened and this was an effect it had on me.
Mhm.
This became unsafe, or this is how I felt about my body. And man, it fucks you up with your relationship to your body as a sexual being. And this is something I want to talk about that brings tears to my eyes. It's like, I want to feel good in my body and I want to feel proud of myself as a woman, but that feels dangerous, right? So if I go out in a dress and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
look good and all that, that doesn't feel safe. I actually, this about me. I get triggered when I put on dresses.
Yes.
I get triggered when I dress up. And I always thought that was because, my mom and I used to fight over clothes and fight over what I looked like and what I wore all the time. And they were physical fights. But now I'm feeling something different is I don't feel safe like walking around feeling good about myself without it feeling potentially dangerous. And that's not fair.
Right.
And I used to think there was something wrong with me. Like I wasn't like all the other girls or the other women. Why I felt like there was something wrong with my body and then feeling so much shame. And I'll say this here. I mean, I think it's funny. I'm in the shower. I wash my body parts like
Mhm.
5 times. There are
Yeah,
jokes
they're
about
clean.
it. He'll
They're
say to
clean.
me, "Do you
I'm like,
think
wow.
that's clean enough?"
I think you're going to give it another pass. You're going to give it. Okay. Wow.
And I'm laughing now. But there is something at the root of that,
Sure.
of connecting to my femininity and my feminine body parts and not feeling like they're dirty and being shameful. I mean, when I get naked in the shower, my body contracts. Like being naked is hard for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard for many women for many different reasons, but this just gives me more aha, an aha moment. Um, and I realize also that men's sexuality feels threatening,
Mhm.
and I have to be honest, as I'm raising these two beautiful boys, when my oldest started going through puberty, I started having nightmares and I started being scared. And I just thought, this is because who knows what's going to happen? He's a teenager, whatever. But I realized there was another sexual being entering our house. And
Mhm.
on some level, my body was reading that as potentially dangerous, which it's not. But I want to say that out loud too, because men's sexuality shouldn't be dangerous. I shouldn't see it that way. And I haven't said that to him. And we talk about his blossoming sexuality and going through puberty and all the things. And I think I've handled it very well. But what I realized is that inability to sleep that first year as he was going through puberty, my body was like, oh, this isn't safe.
Mhm.
And so I just think of all the understandings I've come across, and now I can work on healing that and be even more present with him in his journey through his sexuality. And just, it just feels like, now I can start healing all this, but it's also a like, wait, fuck you. Look what you took
Well,
from me.
right. And just on that point, real quick, we sort of always been puzzled by, as Jake has been talking about sex and sexuality and his body and all of the things, he'd be killing us right now if he knew we were talking about this, by the way. Um, we've noticed that there's a decided energy difference perhaps between me and how I view it and how you've seen it. And now this really makes a lot more sense to me that I didn't actually until this moment, I didn't realize you were really going through that like, you're seeing this male sexuality budding in our house. And it's sort of like, oh, okay, how do I approach that? It's been historically dangerous. And I'm over here going, what are you talking about? It's just, he's dealing with whatever he's dealing with. And how easy is it for me as a man? Because
Yeah.
I'm not as unsafe as you, obviously. I don't have to deal with that as so
Right.
many women do. And so I'm coming at it like, man, I'm really good at this dadding thing. And, and it makes a lot more fucking sense now that, I understand kind of where it's like this just slight little energy that you hold about it. That's like just apprehensive and kind of like you're holding. And I'm like, what is that? What is that? And now I know. So that was really
Yeah.
helpful.
I don't think that was another aha I came up before this conversation because we talked about it, and I felt shame around my reaction. And I always thought it was the way my family held when I started having sex, and my 14-year-old's not having sex. So I just want to make that clear. I'm just saying around the way I was raised with sex and shame and things like that. So I just assumed like, oh, but now I'm understanding that it, I just had this belief that men can't control their sexuality. And here
Right.
I'm living with this man who I love and I don't feel that way about, and these two beautiful boys, and feel this huge responsibility to raise compassionate men. But I'm feeling like when I look and I think of men in general, men can't control it. So what's going to happen to me? This is dangerous. And so now it's been really helpful to have this understanding. And now I feel freer to
Mm-hmm.
settle into conversations with him in a different way. Trauma, man, it's such a bitch. I swear to God,
It's such
it steals so much of your life and connection and experience because
mm-hmm.
it builds these narratives and these stories and these habits and
Mm-hmm.
these behaviors. And if you don't uncover it, it's running the show.
Yeah. Yeah. It runs the show and often unconsciously so, which is terribly dangerous. Anything that operates in shadow like that can be have awful effects. But if it's okay, I do want to dovetail into my not so much my experience, but the experience of the partner who was doing the holding space for this.
Absolutely. And
Is
that
that
was
okay?
one of the things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things I think I said to you about a week after it happened. I asked you, I was like, how are you doing with this?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important because I don't want to sound like, oh, I was this gallant hero, doing all the heroic things and it wasn't about me and I had no feelings. I did have a lot of feelings about it. And it was important for me to recognize that, of course, your feelings were paramount and incredibly important. But you very graciously sat down one day and said, I really want to know how you're feeling and how you're doing with it. Because I was holding some feelings, because quite honestly, we had come to a place in our sex life, quite candidly, that had become really fun, really connective, and just all the things I had always hoped it would be. 22 years in, and here we are, and it's like we're like two kids in the candy store still. And I felt like in a moment, all of that was stolen,
Mm-hmm.
and there was perhaps the notion in me: is this ever going to come back? Is it ever going to be a thing that will we ever get back there? And I felt selfish having those feelings, in having those thoughts, but I knew that I couldn't hold those feelings and those thoughts without them coming out in shadow, coming out sideways, coming out in ways that um, I probably wouldn't be aware of, and it wouldn't be very good, um, and would probably only serve to cause resentment and strife between us. And so, you gave me the opportunity to talk about it. And while I'm not saying that the partner in my shoes, the partner who this didn't happen to, the partner who is holding space for this, I'm not saying you should make it about you. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't. You need to let it be about the unfolding of whatever the repressed memories are, and deal with whatever experience is happening in the moment. But we also have to recognize that you're having experience here too. And so I was grieving the possibility and the loss of that connection with you, and the possibility that it
Mhm.
might never come back. And even to this day, we're still kind of moving through it. This is an active thing within our relationship in this moment. But really giving me the opportunity to talk about it was, first of all, I thought incredibly generous, and it was extraordinarily helpful for me to be able to say, yeah, actually, I do have some feelings about it. I'm scared. I'm, I'm, I'm grieving this because we have this strong, amazing connection in that area. And it's so important to me to connect with you that way, and to also know, like, how do I move now? Um, that's probably another thing we should cover, is like, how do you, the partner who this didn't happen to you, how do you move in this?
Mhm.
Which I
Well,
think
what do
is
you feel like?
very carefully. Well, I think
Yeah, very
through
carefully.
curiosity, very
Yeah.
carefully, and through curiosity, asking questions. What is okay? What isn't okay? And I'm, even in my practice after all these years, I am shocked as shit of how reticent people are to actually speak freely about sex and sexuality and what goes on in there. And so this is one of those times where it's like, okay, so, like, quite literally, what positions are okay? What aren't? Where are you
Mm.
okay going,
Yeah.
and where are you not? Like, in the moment, as you perhaps are pushing up against some of those boundaries, and things might be getting hot and heavy, stopping and saying, are you okay? How is this for you?
Right.
And I guess, what would be good for you?
Are you asking me or?
Yeah.
Oh, good for
Yeah.
you. Yeah, or good for you, the partner.
How does that, yeah, how does that sound to you?
No, it sounds great. I mean, it means so much to me when you say, "Hey, how are you doing? How are you doing with everything?" And then it lets me know that you haven't forgotten, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because this is something that, it happens in the moment you have conversations and life goes on. And I remember feeling a couple of weeks ago, like, I just need the world to stop for a moment. I need the world to stop so that I can just be with this. And I had this visceral experience of whenever this did happen, I don't think I told anybody, but needing the world to stop, but the world kept going. And being a
Right.
little kid with no connection to anyone, no place to carry it, no place to talk about it. And, now as an adult, the world literally does not stop and keeps going. And you have kids to care for and jobs and things like that. So you taking a moment to say, how are you doing with this, and giving me space to sometimes even to touch in, because maybe I haven't touched into it. And that is
Mm-hmm.
helpful. That gives me, just supports me kind of checking in and going, oh, well, this is actually, because sometimes you just asking me that kind of makes me aware of whatever's hiding under the surface. So that's really helpful. And then, just honoring me moving at my own pace. But the conversation I feel like is important between us is you letting you know that our sex life is important to me, that the connection we've built over time is important, that I love it too, that I want to show up for it, and staying in communication with you about it. So you're just not left in the dark. Well, do I approach
Mm-hmm.
her? Do I not? Is it off the table? Is it on the table? I don't want you to be left holding all these unanswered questions because they feel inappropriate to ask. Because that doesn't feel
Mm-hmm.
fair.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be like, this happened to me, so you can't talk about sex, because sex is so important. I know in our relationship, because it's such a connective thing. It's such a thing we ground into each other. It's
Mm-hmm.
not literally. Sorry, that was a
I know where
bad
you're
joke.
going with that.
But it's a grounding, a connective piece. It's a
Yes.
loving piece, and it's important to us.
Mm-hmm.
So to just put that on the back burner and not speak about it feels cruel in a way. It feels abandoning. Like, this is a part of our life, that I have to address.
Yeah.
Um,
And if I haven't said it before, I want to say it again. The person in my shoes and my experience of this is, don't make it all about you, because it's absolutely inappropriate to do that. But it's a little bit about you. It needs to be a little
yeah.
bit about you. If you're not kind of feeling into those feelings, and naming those thoughts, then you're probably lying to yourself. And so it's got to be at large about the person who experienced sexual trauma, of course, but, and you can't make it about you, but you have to make it a little bit about you, and you have to ride that line. And I know that's very vague, directional to give, but that's kind of what you have to do, is ride that line, and get curious and ask a lot of questions.
Well, and if you're not talking about it and you don't know the boundaries or the lines, then what can end up is the partner who this has happened to can get up getting resentful or angry if you cross a line that hasn't been spoken, or
Mhm.
you reach out for connection, or you don't speak about it, or all these unspoken things can create anger and resentment. And so
That's where I
I
was
think,
going, anger and
yeah,
resentment. And it often comes out, again, I use that term, comes out sideways. Next thing you know, you're arguing about this and you're saying and doing shit about something that's very, very raw experience that in this case you're having. And it's like, sorry, it's my phone. You don't want to, you don't want to end up doing that to your partner. That you can end up doing and saying things in that moment that are hard to come back from, that are
mhm,
really hard to apologize for if you're not
yeah.
honoring this person's experience in that way.
Well, and on both sides, if I wasn't talking to you, I'm really angry right now at what happened to me. I feel the anger rising. It's a force. And, you have we have a heavy bag downstairs, and you've been teaching me Thai boxing for a while. And I feel it the most when I'm hitting it. And what I recognize is I can feel the anger at the surface. And there was like a week where I felt like I wasn't as patient as I normally am with you. And I
Mm-hmm.
said it. I said, I feel like I'm edgy. I'm not as soft as I normally am. And you felt it. And I feel like I needed to name that, because it's not about you, but the closest person to you can be the dumping ground for your anger. But I am pissed
Mm-hmm.
off. And,
Yeah.
you know, and the memories are still rising, in the moments where you don't even realize you'll have a flashback or a picture, and you'll get more information. Um, and so I just want to say that anybody who's uncovering this type of trauma, to be really gentle with yourself, to understand that the memories aren't linear. It's not like a movie plays and shows you all the details and you have all the answers. It's just not like that. It comes in sensations and images and pictures in different ways. Just be really gentle with yourself, compassionate with yourself, and trusting what your body's telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Trusting that it's revealing something to you in the pace that you can handle. I mean, we talked about this. If I would have uncovered this 20 years ago, I don't know that I could have handled it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I eventually would have gotten through it, but I don't think I could process it or piece together and reclaim the parts of me that split off because of it. So this feels
No.
like, I talk about healing as a soul retrieval. This feels like a huge soul retrieval for me. And it
Yeah.
doesn't happen overnight.
No. I don't know if I've said it yet, but I felt like as, um, I don't know how you would describe it, certainly inconvenient, um, and something a place where you would not want that sexual trauma to finally reveal itself. As I said to you before, I think it happened in that space for all the right reasons. I think
Yeah.
you thankfully feel incredibly safe there with me. Some part of you knew that I could hold space for it and handle it. And it happened exactly when it was supposed to happen. And the thing I would say to people out there, including anyone who is the partner of someone who's experienced this, get yourself a good therapist. Talk to someone about it if you don't know how to. Get some language around it. Be able to speak to this thing um, as often as you can. It's important, and get curious.
Yeah. And find, for, the victim of this, find a way to channel the anger it brings up. Do something physical, honor the anger. um, grieve for the way it's changed you, the ways it's shaped you. Grieve for what, I don't really want to say loss, because I feel like I'm bringing those things back, but grieving for like who you weren't able to be because of it, and that it has taken something for some time. Like for me, I feel like pieces of me have been taken for a big chunk of my life that I'm finally getting back. And I know there's going to be even more. So really honor your process around it, but really get in touch with that anger so that it doesn't go back down inside your body and become imploded, and then you turn on yourself or feel like you did something wrong.
Mhm.
And then also talking about it with a therapist and people close to you, I think, is really helpful, so you don't continue carrying the shame that these kinds of acts can put in us, because we are not shameful, and there's nothing wrong with us that this has happened to us. We're not gross or bad. It's just somebody did something that they couldn't control, and whatever was going on with them, you're internalizing the shame they probably felt about themselves.
Brave as always, my
Mm.
lady. I
Yeah.
love you.
I love you. Thank you.
All right. We should probably sign off. Um,
Yeah.
I hope this wasn't too triggering for people. It felt like it was an important conversation to have. It's something that's up for us right now as we speak. And again, if you're not pushing on some of those difficult topics in your podcast, maybe you're doing it wrong. So I want to thank you, Ash, for being so brave in this moment, and all the ones up to it, to handle this thing the way you've been handling it.
Thank you. And thank you for handling me the way you've been handling me. I'm really grateful.
Right on.
And thank you for this conversation. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. We'll talk to you soon.